let us begin. Hello everyone and welcome to BHD Studios. This video is going to be my first impressions shooting video using the brand new Fujifilm XF18mm f1.4 RLMWR. And so thank you so much Fujifilm Canada for sending this lens to me early. I've had it for about a week and I've been going out every single day to get as much as I can out of this lens. Even at night, I've got shots in Chinatown, out on the streets downtown, out to the airport, some nature photography. You saw the intro portion, right? And did just a little bit of video testing, but mostly it's about the stills because as you guys know, I love this field of view. I love this 28mm equivalent field of view, and so I've been excited about this lens since Fujifilm announced it. So let's go over some of the basic specs again one more time. I do have a unboxing and first look video, so if you want a little bit more details, close-up of the lens and stuff like that, go check out that video, as well as a video test that I've already posted, and I'll have that link down below as well. But this is again just more about my shooting experiences, and then finally my sort of pros and cons with this lens that I've had for just about a week. So there will be a long-term review, and as well as if I'm going to end up buying this lens. So let's start the video now. So let's start off by just saying that I am a 28mm shooter. Here is the X70, right? This had an 18.5, I think, but you know, basically same 28mm equivalent focal length here. You saw my video where I talked about my EDC camera. In the end, it's a Ricoh GR3, and this has an 18.3mm f2.8 with IBIS and a little point shoot like this. So I like this field of view. It just works for my style of photography. And even going back to my old film days, I have this Minolta 28mm f2.5. I think this is a radioactive lens, so maybe I shouldn't have it so close to my head. But every system that I've had, I've always had a 28mm prime. And so since the original 18 f2, which is kind of a controversial lens, a lot of people don't like it. A few people love it and really love it. I think optically it's sound. It's like a first gen lens that could have been made a little bit better, but it's one of the first three lenses Fujifilm launched, right? The 18 f2, the 35-1.4, and the 60-2.4 f2.4 macro. So definitely it would be nice for them to create a Fujicron version of the 18 f2, so putting a stepping motor, WR, stuff like that. So Mark II would be great, but optically I don't think Fujifilm will change it because that seems to be kind of a trend with Fujifilm. And so since back then, I've been kind of dreaming about there being a 18 f1.4 or a Fujilux. Now I love the 16, here I have it here, the 16 f1.4, and I did use this kind of as a reference point. In terms of field of view, they are different, but also similar. I think a lot of you will be looking at the 18-1.4 and the 16-1.4 and wondering which one you should get, and we can get into that a little bit later down the road. But having this lens has just been a treat for me. I love this field of view. The only real negative about this lens, well there's two, but one is a real negative, is sort of its size and weight, which is also kind of a positive because of the size and weight. Optically, this is a immaculate lens. It does remind me a lot of the 16 f1.4. I know there's gonna be some nerds out there, and I say nerds in the most complimentary way, that will do a tripod back and forth detailed test comparing these two lenses. I'm not gonna do that, but the tests that I've done, very optically sound. Almost no chromatic aberration. Like I took some photos downtown of some buildings where you could see sky and the edge of a building, pictures of trees, and just kind of looked at the sort of the contrast between something dark and bright, looking for any purple or green fringing. Couldn't find even an f1.4. So very well optically corrected, 3 aspherical elements, 1 ED glass element. Very similar in design, like, you know, this has 15 elements and this is a 13 element lens. A very complex design, 9 blade apertures, both of them. Very different than the first gen, the 23-1.4 and the 35-1.4 that had 7 blades, diaphragm opening. Simpler optical design, although as you get closer to 50mm, the optical design can become simpler. and still have a very sharp lens. A 16-1.4 technically is a more difficult lens to create than an 18. So the further away you go away from the 50mm, as you go wider, it gets more complicated, and as you go more telephoto than 50, it gets more complicated. So technically speaking, the 16-1.4 is a more complex lens, and this is, a lot of people arguably say this is the sharpest lens that Fujifilm makes, and I wouldn't argue with it. It's a very, very good lens, but my heart has always been for the 18. So if you're trying to choose between these two, I'd say the best thing is to rent the two. It's not a huge difference when you're doing certain things. I think for street, 18 is better. It's a nice spot between 16 and the 23. So in the full frame world, you're going basically 24, 28, and 35. So the 28 sits in the middle, although this is a 27 equivalent. So I think for street, this is great. For sort of waist-up portraiture, you know, the 23 is better, but you can pull it off. 16, you're starting to get a little bit too much perspective distortion. Group shot, same thing. You can get away with the 18, although you just make sure there aren't too many people very close to the edge. I wouldn't do group shots with the 16-1.4 unless people are very far away from the edge. By that time, you should probably move up to an 18 or 23. For street photography, depending on the city, I think a 16 actually works really well in a city like Hong Kong. And in a city like Vancouver, a 23 lens is probably better for street. If you're willing to get a little bit close, then you can pull it off with the 18, because again, like I said, I'm used to that focal length, and that's probably why a lot of people like using the X70 over the X100, because this has an 18 and then the X100 has the 23, and so, you know, like, there are fans of this and there are fans of the 18 f2, and so let's talk about that for a second. 18 f2 versus 18-1.4. I didn't ask Fujifilm to send that to me because, again, I'm not interested in doing a back-to-back test between those two lenses. That's a very simple, it's like a 7 or 8 element design. It has 7 diaphragm blades. It's a Gen 1 design. It's like a third the weight of this, but price-wise, it's still 600 US. This is gonna come in at about 1,000 or 999 US, which will match the price of the 16-1.4. So very smart Fujifilm. They know their marketplace. But, you know, for $600 US for the 18 f2, for another $400, you're getting this 18-1.4. So one stop brighter, more aperture blades, you get weather sealing, you get a improved autofocus with the linear motor, so you get quiet, quick, and accurate autofocus, unlike the Gen 1 focusing system. Fujifilm says there's 6 elements, floating elements that all move to focus. So it's kind of a complicated lens design in terms of autofocusing, but in the end, it works out quite well. So if you are used to the 18 f2, I would say you might end up not liking this because of the size and weight. I can guarantee you'll like this optically. It's a treat. This lens is a treat optically, but in terms of size and weight, are you willing to walk around with this lens? Now, Fujifilm, when we have the presentation, they had it on X Pro 3, and all of us know that the X Pro 3 no longer has the 18mm frame lines. Although, funny enough is that they could still put it in here. So Fujifilm, I would say, like, I can see, so here I'm in optical, and then I switch over to digital, and I could see everything digitally, what the lens, like what the sensor is seeing. I can still see it inside the viewfinder. Now with glasses, I can't see it, but with my contacts on, I can see. So they could put 18mm frame lines. I think the problem is that the size of this lens, it encroaches about half of the quarter bottom right corner. And so if you're shooting something far away, I guess it's okay, but as you get closer and you get parallax error, that's probably one of the reasons why. And if you're an 18 f2 shooter and you have an X Pro 2 and you like using the optical viewfinder, this lens again might not really suit your style, because you have to kind of really commit to this lens to walk around the city with a lens that's this huge, just to be able to get a single focal length. And so 18 f2, 18 f1.4, I think it's really two different camps. It's like Fujicron versus Fujilux, where, you know, the 35-1.4 and 35 f2, in terms of size and weight, there isn't a huge difference. What you're going to notice in those lenses is really the stepping motor that's in the Fujicron. This thing here, you're going to notice that focusing difference. You're going to notice with the WR, so you'll be less worried going out shooting in the rain, in the dust, and humidity. But size and weight, there's a huge penalty, like a 3 times weight penalty independently when you get a lens like this. And so let's move on to sort of my experience shooting with this out and about. So optically, this lens is great all the way from f1.4 to f16. In direct sunlight, you do get the plastic lens hood. You can get the optional squared off lens hood, which I think actually would control some of the stray light flare better. So if you like shooting out in the daylight and you like using lens hood, get the optional lens hood for this lens, and it just looks way cooler. But you know, you get weird, I mean, there's 15 elements in here. So if the light comes in the wrong way and you get the crazy internal reflection in this lens, f1.4 is very difficult during the day, and so I have to use a variable ND filter to put on here to shoot f1.4 video, but as well as for stills, I have to go into electronic shutter mode, which I don't like because you get rolling shutter. And so this lens 1.4, even at ISO 160, out in bright daylight, you're gonna go above the 1/8000th of a second mechanical shutter speed. So you're gonna have to either get used to electronic shutter or get a ND filter. But at night is really where this lens shines at f1.4. And I've posted pictures, and I'll post pictures of me shooting with this lens at night. But what I did notice is I'm shooting this video on the X-T4, but even with an XH1, having IBIS and having this lens is great, because then you can stop down to a very magical f5.6 to f8. And you get the little starburst, you know, like a street lamp or a street light or something, and you get the starburst effect. You get that with this lens. It's beautiful. And even at f4, you can sort of see it start. And I did a test with the lens I'm shooting this video on right now is the 16-80 f4, so it starts at f4, and its f4 starburst is kind of ugly. You have to really kind of stop it down. This thing at f4 has decent starburst, and you know, on a IBIS equipped camera body, you can access that and still get that wide angle look, which you could also get with the 16-1.4 as well. But even low light autofocus was great. I found the sweet spot for this lens is about f2.8, because sometimes even if you want to shoot at f1.4, the depth of field is so shallow that there's no point, right? Like you gotta stop it down. So I enjoyed being at f2.8, and then when you need it, you have f1.4 and f2 and all the in-between apertures. And during the day, probably around f5.6 was great. And you know, this lens is just beautiful. You do get vignetting at f1.4, which is acceptable for a lens like this. You can correct it in post, but by the time you're at f2, it's pretty much gone. But overall, for street photography, highly recommend this lens. If you're used to a 23, you probably will realize you got to take a few steps closer. And there were some shots where, like, if I was across the street, a 35 lens just kind of spoils you. You can, you know, frame it perfectly across the street. With the 18, you have to run across the street and get much closer to your subjects and let them get much closer to you. So if you have abandoned streets that we are having right now because of the pandemic here in Vancouver, it's difficult to get people really close to you. So I did find I had to get used to shooting with the 18. Since the pandemic, I've been testing like the 33 Viltrox and the 23 and the 25, and I've gotten used to having a bit more distance, and so that's something that I had to get used to, but I'm sure I will get used to it. And once I'm back in a city like Hong Kong, I'm sure I would love to have a bright prime lens like this. And even for talking head video, I have this lens at 18, and when I do these kind of videos in my studio, I prefer between 18 and 23, and I had the 23 f2 forever for talking head, but I also like the 18. It has a kind of a nice airy feel to it. And let's you know, in fact, let me change this lens over. All right, so now I have the 18 1.4 at 1.4, and because of that, I actually had to change the shutter speed to 1/240th of a second. So you're gonna get these weird little jittery bits, but that's the only way I can do this, unless you use an ND filter, which I didn't want to put in front because I am shooting this in 4K 24. So this is it. This is the f1.4 video. So what do you think? I find it a little bit too shallow. You saw that even with the 16-80 at 18mm at f4, there was decent shallow depth of field. But if you're looking for ultimate tone, this is kind of what you're gonna get, and autofocus is reasonably good. Let's just put it up front here. It's gonna naturally try to focus on my face and then back on my face. And I didn't adjust the camera autofocus speed settings. I just kind of put it whatever the standard is. So this is the speed, and I apologize for getting this close again. And then I back off like this. That's sort of how this lens autofocuses. And this is kind of what 18 f1.4 talking head video. So this is what you're looking for. You're looking for a bokeh-licious talking head video piece. Maybe this lens is the right lens for you. And so I'm gonna switch back to my handy dandy 16 to 80. All right, we're back. And this time I've mounted the 18-1.4 on the XH1. So again, like the XT4, I think this is a really good combination. If you like this 27mm equivalent field of view and you like getting those starbursts and you're doing like landscape, nature type stuff, or even like cityscape things, and you want a high performance professional optics lens that's in between a 16 and a 23, so in between a 24 and a 35mm equivalent, this 18-1.4 is a beautiful lens to shoot with. One of the negatives, I said there's two negatives between, so here's the 16-1.4 and this is the 18-1.4. There isn't a huge size difference. I do wish that this was slightly smaller, so as you get closer to 50, you know that the 23-1.4 is smaller and lighter than these two lenses. And by the time you get to 35-1.4, that lens is pretty light, and if Fujifilm made a 50-1.4, that would have been probably the lightest and smallest out of all the Fujilux lenses, right? All the f1.4 lenses, but there isn't one. There's a 56-1.4 and a 50 f1. But I was hoping that the difference between 16 and 18 would be enough that the 18 would be smaller. So the front diameter is 62mm versus 67mm, not a huge difference. The diameter on the 16 is a little bit wider, but this lens here is a little bit longer. And in terms of price, they're the same price, which is all right because they're both pro optics and you have to pay for that. But the 16mm f1.4 has a 15 centimeter close focusing distance. And I have friends that have the 16-1.4, and I asked them, I said, hey, what is it about the 16-1.4 that you like? Like, why do you like it so much? And they said it's macro focus capabilities. You get 15 centimeters, and that's to the sensor. You get 15 centimeters. And so you're getting a 0.21 times magnification, which isn't huge in the world of macro photography, but at the same time, this is ultra wide 0.21 times. So you're getting really close, and you get weird perspective distortion as you get really close to your subject. It really pulls the background really far back, unlike more of a telephoto lens that kind of tends to compress it. This thing, because it's a wide angle and you're getting really close to your subject, it makes the background look further back. This 18-1.4 has a 20 centimeter minimum focus distance, which is actually a little bit worse performing than the 18f2. That lens has an 18 centimeter. And so I have some pictures where I went to minimum focus, 18mm f1.4, you do get shallow depth of field, but I wish you could get just a little bit closer. So if you have the 16-1.4 and you're doing like macro type photography, and then you switch to this, you're gonna lose 5 centimeters of close focusing distance. And so that's the one thing. It would have been nice if this maybe had a macro mode and they actually would switch the lens elements. I mean, a lot of people love the Leica Q because of its macro focus mode, right? And even the Ricoh GR had a really good macro focus. You get really close, like 3 centimeters, I think, to your subject. And so having an 18mm lens with the macro mode would have been amazing, but with this optical design, Fujifilm obviously couldn't make it happen without compromising something else. And so optically, I'm happy with it. Yes, I wish you could have focused closer, as close as a 16-1.4, but it's not. So if that's something that you were counting on, then don't count on it. You can't get that close. You can't get as close as you can as the 16-1.4. And so overall, like this video isn't gonna be about choosing this or this. I think you really have to know if you want a 24 equivalent or 27 equivalent. If you're gonna be shooting in tight spots, interiors, car interiors, this inside in general, like a studio, and you need a nice wide shot, obviously you go with the 16, especially if you want that f1.4. If you want something that's a little bit more general purpose, street, sort of lifestyle, you can even do nature with this, and family shots, outings, has fast autofocus, is weather sealed, and you have a body with IBIS, so you don't always have to be at f1.4, so you're doing landscapes and cityscapes and seascapes and stuff like that. I think it's great to have a lens like this. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention is that, the 16-1.4, for those you don't know, it has that clutch focus system where you pull this back, you get manual focus, and then you push it down like that, and it locks back into autofocus. It was kind of cool when it first came out, and for someone who didn't do video or much video at that time, I thought it was cool. But now that I do more video, I think this sort of more modern style of just having a manual, because it was an electronic focus by wire anyways in the 16-1.4, and so being able to be in autofocus and immediately being able to take over autofocus, fine tuning it, and then if you just let go of the focus ring and then it goes back into autofocus mode, this is more convenient for video. So if you're a video shooter, I think having this style of focus is great. And another little thing I noticed is because this focus ring is so wide and then the aperture ring's right there, there's like a half-inch space here. So if you're taking the lens on and off, if you grab the focus ring by accident, it's like you can't take the lens off. And if you grab the aperture ring, same thing, until it gets to the end, then you can take the lens off. There's three little awkward little spaces at the tip, in the middle, and at the very front here. So, you get used to it, but a few times I did grab the lens and then spin it, and it's like, oh, you're grabbing the focus ring. So it's a small little quibble. So overall shooting experience, fantastic. I can personally put up with the size and weight. If you have an 18 f2, I don't think so. If you have a 16-1.4, basically it's the same size and weight, so you just kind of get used to it. If you don't have either lens, just sort of figure out what your priorities are, but both lenses are optically great. Although having this more modern lens design, having this newer way of dealing with manual and autofocus is great. And then having that LM, that linear mode in here for quicker, quieter, more accurate autofocus makes it possible to be able to use it for video, sort of hands-free video, like this, talking head, and not have to worry so much about noise or hunting or anything like that. So I think maybe for video and you rely on autofocus, maybe the 18-1.4 is the way to go. But for me, it's going to be primarily for street, low light photography, not so much for the bokeh. If it's there, it's great, but if I don't need it, I'm going to be stopped down to f2.8. Am I willing to put up with the size and weight? I don't really have a choice because the 18 f2 is not a lens I really want. And so while I would use it for overhead video, I find that 18 works really well for me, and as well as talking head, which I am at 18 here with the 16-80. Is a good field of view for video, and having, again, this autofocus, quiet and accurate is something that I'm looking for, something like really reliable. So $999 US, approximately. It's going to be 1,275 Canadian, $80 for the square hood, about $70 US for that same lens hood. I don't have US pricing, I just have Canadian pricing, but I think it's gonna be $999, so it'll match the price of the 16-1.4, and it makes sense that these two lenses will be priced similarly because the kind of field of view is reasonably the same type of photography looking at these two lenses. And in terms of optical performance, again, someone's gonna do a hardcore back-to-back test. I'm not gonna do it, but both of these lenses are very, very sharp, and the rendering is nice, and control of the chromatic aberration is really nice. And so I think you can't go wrong with either of these lenses, but my choice would probably be with the 18-1.4. This is a pre-production copy, so I'm gonna wait for my production copy to come in and then do my final, kind of critical tests for myself, and then I'll come back and let you know if I ended up buying this lens. But at this point, I kind of want this lens. I was told by Fujifilm that it's late May for the sales embargo, but depending on what country you're in, you might be able to get a little bit sooner, or might be a little bit later. So I'll put the links down below for you to pre-order this lens, and there'll be affiliate links. Help me out a little bit. But if not, wait for more reviews, wait for my long-term review, and see if I end up buying this lens, because that's kind of what you guys want to know, right? Does Take like this lens enough that he actually buys it? I'm considering it. I'm pretty excited. I've only had it for a week, right? So I'll revisit this. I might even do a live video with you guys and share more photos with you. And if you have any more questions that I didn't think about, then you can ask me. Ask the question down below as well, but I will be doing a live video probably sometime in the next week or so. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where I do stories and sort of other zany stuff, as well as my article in Fuji Love magazine. I'm gonna have a written article and more pictures for you to enjoy. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you again, Fujifilm Canada, for sending this lens to me early, and happy shooting. Peace.